Of the three aspects, the first one we talked about with the glory of my mind yesterday was conception, right? When a character first walks onto stage, we know how to analyze who and what they are and how they function within a drama. So the next step after a character is conceived is to articulate that role. So we're going to talk a little bit, this is going to be pretty short today, about role articulation. So my first question for you is, what does it mean to articulate something? Anybody want to take a stab? If I were to ask you, can you articulate that for me? What am I asking you to do? To clearly express your thoughts about something? Good. Anybody want to add to that? Very good. Yeah?
I mean, like, so when you're speaking, it's to articulate, it's to really stress each syllable and word so that you can hear what you say.
To consider very carefully how and what you are saying, because details matter, right? That's very good. When we talk about articulating a character, we're not talking about speech so much as we're talking about adding details to a character. Once you've established a character, that character has to grow, change, interact with other characters, and that sort of thing. So here's your definition. To articulate means to give an idea a particular shape so that it might be transmittable to an audience. Make it digestible for people. Make it believable for people. That's what articulating a character does. Okay? And like I just said, a playwright does the same in order to transmit ideas through those characters. Those would be the bases for a character and the rhetorical functions of a character. Okay? There are three ways to articulate stage roles: external, internal, and logical. Today we're going to be talking about external ways in which a playwright can articulate a character. That's our focus today, external ways. So we're going to talk a little bit about something called positioning. This is a word that you can use on paper too. The way in which a playwright or author, whatever you want to call them, positions a role. So the first question I have for you, and we've talked about this in TOK before, is the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I think we've talked about it in here as well before, yeah? I'm getting some nods. If you're sympathetic, you feel for somebody. If you're empathetic, you feel with that person. When I was a senior in high school, one of my best friends lost one of their parents to cancer, and it was really rough going. I had to sympathize with her because I hadn't experienced that pain going through an emotional thing like that before. So all I could do was sympathize with her. Does that make sense to everybody? I can't know that because I'm in a way removed from it. If to empathize with somebody is to also be familiar with the pain that they feel. Give me an example. I can't think of one. Help me out here. What's something we could all sympathize about? Something we've all experienced. What's that?
Sympathize.
Sympathize. Or, I'm sorry, excuse me, empathize. What's something we can all empathize?
IB.
What's that?
IB.
IB, the pain that is going through the IB, the pain that is being a DP2, the pain that is here for everyone. Living, yeah. You can all empathize with your comrades in this class, yeah? That's a very good example, okay? The reason we're talking about sympathy and empathy is because they're sort of a spectrum, they're sort of two sides of the same coin, and they're important to developing and articulating a dramatic role, okay? When we think about real life, we look at these not as equals. Being able to empathize with someone, we hold in higher regard than just simply being able to sympathize, right? If you had a friend come to you who was able to empathize with your problems, that would be a more sort of meaningful experience than them just saying, oh, I sympathize, you have my sympathy, right? Does that make sense? Okay? In drama, we do the same thing, but each one is equally useful because as you sit in an audience and you watch action on stage, you're doing both of these things. Now what's tricky is that a playwright doesn't know their audience. They know that there will be one, but they don't know the individual sitting there. They don't know your life history, they don't know the things that you've experienced, right? So in a way, an author has to find balance between creating sympathy and creating empathy within an audience, and that involves generalization. Is everybody with me? Cool. Okay. There was a playwright, a postmodern playwright, modernist playwright, called Bertolt Brecht, and he came up with sort of this structure and thought about how you could look at character articulation. He is a name that you could drop in a paper too and make an examiner go, ooh, they talked about Brecht. His main point was that audience should be removed from what's going on stage. They should be what? Empathetic or sympathetic? Sympathetic, yeah. He said that most comedy, and we're not doing a lot of comedy, but you're getting it in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, involves being removed, being objective about what's going on stage. Because if you think about comedy for a second, it's much easier to laugh at something from an objective point of view than a subjective point of view. It's easier to laugh when you're sympathetic than when you're empathetic, because then you're removed and not involved. Does that make sense? But that's just comedy. When we think about tragedy, the sort of balance of sympathy and empathy, or whatever sort of genre you're talking about, would be changed. Does that make sense? So if you're writing a tragedy, maybe you want to involve more empathy because you want an audience to connect more with that character and you want to play upon their emotions, more than trying to get them to laugh at a silly joke, which they need to be objective about. So I'm using Polonius's word, prepend. Think about it. What is the difference between subjective and objective from an audience's perspective? How are they different when it comes to an audience watching something on stage? Can a playwright attain true objectivity and completely remove an audience from what's on stage? Can they? Yeah? Why not?
Because there might be some people in the audience, they don't hand select the people they choose.
What if they make it weird enough? Is it possible for them to make something so out there and different that the audience just cannot connect with it? They could try, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. But why would you do that? Right? If the audience has no investment, the audience does not care, and the audience does not want to stay and watch the rest of the play, right? Think about the other side of the spectrum. If you go all the way for subjectivity and you try and completely play on the emotions of an audience, what's the result or effect then?
They're miserable?
They're miserable because they only see themselves and what's going, oh my goodness, my life is on stage. I don't want to watch that either, right? So what I'm trying to show you is that that balance is hard to attain, and seeing it done well is why we're here. We're here to appreciate the characters from the balance of subjective and objective points. So stay tuned, because the next thing I'm going to have you do is look at the characters from Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, and The Glass Menagerie, and tell me how the balances are created, and that helps to articulate these characters and make them grow and change and be unique. I think we've covered this mostly. When we take a look subjectively at characters on stage, we get empathy. Does that make sense? When you look at them objectively, sympathy is the result. Yeah, can you connect those two things? When it comes to positioning, drama's pretty straightforward, unlike the other genres. We are looking at a figure on stage who sees and knows less than we do. What's that called again? Dramatic irony, right? That everything about drama is sort of based on this concept. At least traditional drama, your postmodernists start to mess with it. But putting a fourth wall there, the audience accepts and understands, whether they understand it in the technical sort of literary theory speech we're using, or just as an idea without putting it into words, that everything going on stage is not known by the characters, but known by us. We become omniscient because we are the audience. We know everything that's going on, and we can put the puzzle pieces together that the characters can't, right? So your job is to understand and appreciate empathy, sympathy, and objectivity, and to help how they create roles. I said that earlier too. I got ahead of myself, sorry. Okay, here is your task. I want you to think about the character of Prince Hamlet and how he is articulated throughout the play. So I want you to give me examples of traits, dialogue, and action that help to articulate his character. And I want you to split them into two groups. Things that are relatable to you as an individual or as a pair, you can do this together. And I want you to come up with traits, dialogue, action that is unique and unrelatable to you, that creates subjectivity or objectivity? Objectivity, yeah? I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do this. Then we'll come back and we'll make lists. Any questions about what I'd like you to do? The whole play, from Act 1, Scene 2 to Act 5, Scene 2. Take examples from the whole play of how Shakespeare helps us to articulate Prince Hamlet. I'm not telling you to do every single thing from the whole play. I'm telling you to take from the whole play. You look really scared. Okay? Good. Get to work.